Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Physical Therapy Private Practice, Secrets of the Top 10%. My name is Brian Gallagher, I'm your host, and this week I have a guest here on our podcast, and it is a little off the beaten path of what I'm normally talking to you about with your personal growth ideas and your tips for professional success. But when I really sit back and reflect on what you're about to hear, it's really not. It really is. If you combine those two aspects of your life, both personal and professional, I think you guys are going to find yourselves right up the center of the road with what Dr. Hinson has to share with you all today. When I was at the state chapter of the APTA called the Georgia APTA Impact Conference just a couple weeks ago, I sat in on this seminar by Dr. Hinson and I was blown away. I am like, this is exactly what the public has to hear. This is exactly what we have to start questioning and finding solutions to, because I think continuing along the same path is insanity. Many of you have heard me developing and talking to you about the 1950s fee-for-service business model. We can't fix that model, guys. It can't be fixed. If you're telling me the solution is more patients, more units, more patients, more units, that's the last two arrows you have in your quiver. That's the end of the road. It has to be thrown out, and we have to go with this progressive PT practice model. And Dr. Hinson is taking it to another level on the entire healthcare system. So, Dr. Hinson, thank you so much for spending your time here on our podcast. If you wouldn't mind, just introduce a little bit about your past and who you are and what brought you up to today in your message, because I really want to touch on some of the topics of your message, but I think people really need to connect with who you are and how you got here.
Sure. Well, it's much appreciated. So I'm a general internist by training. I got my bachelor's in neuroscience from Hopkins, went back to Philly to Drexel to get my medical degree. And I did my residency in internal medicine at New York Presbyterian while Cornell in New York City. From that point, I spent several years as a hospitalist, so only doing inpatient medicine. But I started to wear on me pretty quickly, actually, as I found it fun. It was exciting. I was good at it. I was getting promoted. I was getting awards. I was publishing. I was doing all. I was really at the height of my professional career, but I just wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't fulfilled. And part of the reason was because I knew I could do more with the skill set that I was blessed with, right? I knew I could do more with the knowledge and the information and the people skills and all these things. And, it started to really wear on me when I felt like I was just continuing the exploitation of sick people, because that's what this healthcare system does. It doesn't do much with regard to providing health. It provides goods and services for sick people. So it's a sick care model. And, I just realized that I could do more in trying to keep people out of the hospital rather than treating them in the hospital, temporizing them and sending them out knowing that they were going to come right back. And so where MetaRoots came about, MetaRoots Medical Group, I was transitioning out of the inpatient setting and got heavy into medical cannabis. So I did the state certification program, got certified to be able to educate and certify patients for medical cannabis. And I'd always been a proponent of it. I used it myself, and I can admit to it now. It's actually one of the ways that I survived residency, because residency was traumatic in its own fashion. And I recall having issues sleeping and things like that. And I went right back to, smoking flower and had no issues. So I've always been a strong proponent of medical cannabis, and I used that as a way to transition out of inpatient medicine. And then, I had a couple sort of traumatic life-changing events. I lost my son during the birth process, and my partner and I, we were trying to figure out, where do we go from there? And we went on, we stopped working for close to a year and just traveled, and we ended up in Peru doing ayahuasca. And we spent about a week in Peru. We did ayahuasca 2 nights in San Pedro, and we had a bunch of different light and sound healing sessions. And it was at that moment, actually, we had just done San Pedro, took a hike up to the mountain. We were in Cusco, and we overlooked the entire town, came back and had a sound healing session. One gentleman who played 16 different instruments, and he was able to recreate the jungle. And then he started playing the drums, and I felt all my internal organs just start to vibrate. And that's when I just had this catharsis. I just couldn't stop crying. And several days after that, because he also helped us to reintegrate, these events, these experiences. Then several days after that, I said, you know what? I need to broaden MetaRoots and be a full service primary care practice with the philosophy that I've been, coming up with this entire time. And from that point on, I was just reading like energy medicine, quantum medicine. I was looking at different ancient forms of medicine, and it just started to resonate so much more. And I said, you know what? I'm not demonizing Western medicine. It's great at certain things, but it's also not so great at a lot of things. And I think we found a way to combine the traditional practices because we know they work. They just refuse to put the science behind it. We know traditional practices work. We know acupuncture and chiropractic and Reiki and reflexology and all these. We know it works, but they don't put the science behind it because then now we have to share this market with the pharmaceutical industry, and the surgical specialty. So I said, you know what, let's put together an integrative program that focuses on addressing the root cause of disease, because essentially that's what we need to get to. I'm all about prevention, and I'm about mitigation of chronic disease. And the only way you can do that is to address the underlying cause for it. We practice symptom management in this healthcare system. We don't address the issue. Very little do we put an emphasis on curative therapies or preventative care therapies. We actually spend less than 3% on preventative care. So you see where this healthcare model is, and is business oriented, is rooted in capitalism, and therefore prioritizes the dollar over the person. But that's not why I got into medicine.
Right. Right.
That's
Me either. And I couldn't agree with you more on that. And so it brought you to that experience is unbelievable. That's a very endearing and touching past that you have there. And it's amazing. Whatever journey we take, it brings us to where we are today. And where we are today is, what are you going to do with this life, right? Because life equals time. So when time runs out, life's out, right? So what are you going to do with your time? And now you've embarked on this journey of MetaRoots. And what I love about it is you're really interested in the origin of things, in spite of the fact that you're within this Western medicine model, which is not a healthcare system. It's a health cost system. It's a financial system. I think we can all agree that in what you said, it drives a lot of the decision making. I also believe we have not just an industrial military complex. We have a pharmaceutical and industrial pharmaceutical complex. We have an industrial media complex, and they're all sharing and they're all spending money on each other and they're all forwarding it. But for people like you and I, like I said to you off the air, my purpose in having you on this podcast is I believe you're going to help me in my two main reasons for getting out of bed every day, which is I want to help advance the profession of physical therapy. And I want to help every single physical therapist, regardless of what their title, position, or goals are, achieve optimum, their optimum goal, their optimum dream, their ideal scene for themselves. And that starts by us helping other people in our life achieve optimum health, right? I think the whole reason of going to physical therapy school, and I would think going to med school, should be, I want to help as many people achieve optimum health as possible. And I want to give as much care as I can with each engagement that they bless me with the opportunity to treat them with. So with that said, you started MetaRoots on the premise of attacking what? Because you bring into this, now that we know the healthcare system's been failing us for a long time, and it doesn't look like it's getting any better, you are integrating certain elements and aspects into your medical care that is just deeper than what the average person is doing. Let's talk about some of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so that from an infrastructural standpoint, I think we do ourselves an injustice in how we practice primary care. So we all talk about primary care and how that is the center element for prevention and disease management, right? But we practice it horribly, right? So just it never made sense to me that a person would be sick or in pain, and we expect that patient to leave their home, travel to my office, and sit in my office for hours to see me for a couple minutes, and then for me to say, okay, you know what, just take this and call me in the morning. Like, no, that doesn't make sense, right? The traditional model was that your doctor came to your home, you were sick. It doesn't make much sense for us to expect you to travel while you're sick. And so I think what happened with COVID and how it moved everything indoors and really helped to expand telemedicine. Now I can reach people in their homes virtually, right? But we're combining that with in-home care. So for people who are actually like very sick, like I will go to their home, or we'll meet people at their jobs, you know, so that people don't have to take off work. We're trying to increase the convenience and accessibility to primary care, because that's what it's all about. We have to get people better and more access to primary care, quality primary care services. Okay. Now, from a philosophical standpoint, I think the element that Western medicine really fails at even addressing, it's almost like they completely disregard our spiritual nature. You know, we as human beings, we're spiritual beings in a physical vessel. We're not physical beings with the spirit. But Western medicine doesn't even entertain the idea of this spiritual component because we can't see it, we can't touch it, taste it, we can't measure it, right? But we are starting to bring together these sort of physical correlates to spiritual energy, is what I call it. So a lot of the bioelectromagnetic fields and using the squid sensor and things like, now we're starting to understand like that whole concept that we really do have an aura, you know, and that aura is electromagnetic, and that aura affects other people around us, and that aura extends to the farthest end of the universe, you know. So this is
Yep,
this
yep,
to me is that spiritual component, because that's what spirituality is. You know, it's not Casper the Friendly Ghost. No, it's our
yep.
it's the interconnectedness of all things within the universe. You know, the interconnectedness of each cell in our body, between people, with our earth, with the universe. So I think when we start to really understand and we put things in respect to like electromagnetic fields and energy, now we're starting to see, because that never dissipates entirely. It doesn't matter how far out it goes. Every movement that you make on this planet has an effect at the most distant part of the universe, you know, however minute. And I think we need to start thinking in that respect and start looking at our body from a spiritual standpoint. And I think the way that we can do that and also entertain the purists, the scientists, is by studying the electromagnetic properties of the human body.
You're absolutely right. It's so I give you so much credit for being so courageous to go out there and say what people don't want to say, but they all know. I mean, I worked hospice, and I can tell you, work hospice for a while. And when that time comes and that spiritual being leaves that physical vessel, you know it. You feel it. If you've ever held someone's hand at that moment of life, and it's a circle of life, right? I mean, look, common sense tells us if physics is correct, that energy can't be created or destroyed. It's only being evolved and re-evolved and re-evolved. So we need to care for that energy. And not to regress here, but to go back to your practice model of bringing care to the people, PTs are doing this in droves. They're doing mobile PT practices, cash-based practices, hybrid built practices, because they're breaking out of the institutional model. So I don't want to regress into that, but I really applaud your medical approach in that sense. And then moving forward into the spirituality as we are spiritual beings that occupy a physical vessel. Perfectly well said. I often tell people, you are not your hand. You operate your hand. You operate this. I mean, if you close your eyes and you can envision something, who's looking at that, right? The spiritual being is the one looking at that. I think taking that into account, like people who laugh more, people who have more positive energy, they're just healthier, right? I believe that energy can be, transferred into your chemical, physiological resistance or immunity or tolerance for particular things where others are not. So I think a lot of us who give that some thought, that really makes sense. There has to be a reason for change, though, like anything, right? There has to be a reason for change. You and I can talk about it anecdotal like we have here, but you dove into it. And I want to go further into the care side, because I think a lot of the physical therapists are really interested in hearing more about that and what they can do about that too. But like I said, you dove into there has to be a need for change. I pulled up your slideshow here, and slide 5, the US spends twice the amount on healthcare than the average comparable developed nation. That's just fact. Like, you're just pounding the facts. US has the greatest burden of chronic disease out of all of, are these years that you have here on the slide? Or these are numbers of the number of chronic diseases over, are you comparing it to 11 industrialized nations when you look at that?
OPEC, yeah.
Yes, that's crazy. I mean, these are just facts. The US has the lowest life expectancy out of what? Again, the 11, right? The 11 countries?
Countries, yeah. And if you look at that slide, so
By
that
a lot.
I believe that slide was from 2019. I don't have it up.
Yeah, it is.
I know it was pre-COVID, and
Yeah.
I use that data specifically because if you look at the U.S. is the only state where the life expectancy actually dropped, and this is pre-COVID. So all the countries, every country, life expectancy dropped post-COVID, but this is pre-COVID. It's the only country whose life expectancy over those 20 years that they surveyed that dropped.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. And by a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
mean,
it's fact. We're not hiding these things, and then we're not changing the way we're practicing. So that is the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and expect, but it makes you think, like, is the intent really to improve the health of American people? I don't think so. I think they hide the greed and corruption under the guise of delivering quality healthcare, but it's all financially driven.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, why would somebody at an insurance company desk dictate to me my plan of care, intervention? Like, this doesn't even make rational sense to an 8-year-old, right? It's like, well, shouldn't my physician, shouldn't my doctor of physical therapy be deciding what's in my best interest? But it comes down to your slide 12 here. I have the luxury of pulling it up here. The tale of two systems. You just can't ignore, the tale of two systems basically is balancing. Dr. Hinson's suggesting that it's the balance between the health and well-being of people and the business model that you have to practice under. And I'll tell you, what you said earlier really resonated with me. About 3 months ago in February, I always come off the grid and I do some 2 or 3 weeks by myself and do some deep reading and studying. And then I bring that information back. And what I studied was the origins of our healthcare system, the origins. And it took me back to the 1700s, where there was common medicine practices taught, primary care, taught to the spouse, predominantly the mothers and the women of the house, and the grandmothers, and it passed down, and they knew how to handle most things but you would go to a medico, they would say, or a medical professional for the big things. You fractured, or the life-threatening things, and that's when you would see the physician. And that system went on for a couple hundred years, hundreds of years. And then when the AMA got involved and stuff like that, 5 times, I don't know if you ever saw this research, but 5 times in our past, different presidents, different governmental bodies have tried to have a nationalized healthcare system of uniformity. And I'm not sure I'm pro or against in today's world, but I just thought it was interesting that 5 presidents, well before Obama, tried to say, we need a healthcare system that takes the profit out of it. We need a healthcare system that is there to support. And who shot it down every single time? The AMA. It was the AMA. The AMA shot it down every time. They lobbied hard against it, and they canceled the votes. So I find that very interesting, because I think what we have now is worse than what we may have had if it was done when Truman wanted to do it and Roosevelt wanted to do it way back when the purpose wasn't so polarized, right?
Yeah. No, I wasn't aware of that, but I'm not surprised. The more I look into it, the more I read. I read there's a book you would probably be interested in. I think it's called Rockefeller and Medicine Men, something like that. And it's basically also about the origins of our current healthcare system and how a lot of it was driven by capitalism. And you had those key players. You had J.D. Rockefeller, you had Andrew Carnegie, you had a few others who really conjured up, they put their money together. They put out these media campaigns. They demonized herbal therapy, which was the main thing at that time. It was a lot of Native American herbal therapy. There was electrotherapy. There was homeopathy. And they completely decimated, the existence of these institutions with the Flexner Report. So they're the ones who funded the Flexner Report, which was done, I think published in 1910, which basically surveyed all of the medical schools in the country and created a quality standard. So from that report, I think something on the order of like 80 schools were closed. You know, the ones that didn't teach pharmaceutical medicine as the basis for medicine. So this was all purposely constructed this way, you know.
Yep.
And, you know, if we do value the health of the American people, which they claim they do, then we have to go back to the systems of medicine that actually work pre the introduction of capitalism into healthcare.
And the pharmaceutical dominance, right? I mean, it's insane how much overweight that has. You know, I'm looking, you know, for everybody listening, it was such a great presentation. I couldn't help but pull it up during this podcast. But, you know, you get halfway through and you have this slide and all it has is this big question mark on it and it says, what do we do? You know, what do we do? And underneath you say philosophical, cultural, and practical shift. And for all of you guys listening in physical therapy, all you PT owners that we have here on the audience, I think you're asking yourself the same thing. Like, so what do we do, Brian? And that's why I talk about the progressive physical therapy practice model, where you outsource billing, outsource credentialing, outsource your front desk services, outsource your marketing services. Because what you do is you get back to doing your clinical care. You get back to elevating your intervention on the clinical side. And you don't just sit there and say, I got to do what's just in the confines of the insurance model or what the insurance is going to approve or disapprove. You've got to seek outside that model and bring it in. So I think, Dr. Hinson, you said it best. You brought up this example of, you know, this individual, and I can't tell if I can read it from the slide, the Royal Riff, when could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think this is what I am huge proponent of magnet therapy and laser and, you know, I mean, the newbie e-stim is just an amazing device that people are, you know, and of course, HRV. So along those lines, talk about, this goes all the way back to 1944 when these kind of things happen. I think people need to know what you do has been attempted earlier, but we actually have to follow through on it now.
Through. Yeah, so Royal Rife was he was an inventor, scientist. I think he was American actually, but don't hold me to that. But he came up with his own microscope, which allowed him to view live pathogens, right? Because normally, typically now, like, you have to have a dead specimen in order to look at it under a microscope. But he was able to view bacteria and viruses using this microscope he created. And what he ended up doing was introducing specific light frequencies, and he found that he could kill any bacteria, any virus, depending on their specific, he called it MOR, a mortal oscillatory rate. So he basically said that every organism has a frequency which is susceptible to. So he went on and he was curing, you know, viral diseases, bacterial diseases, cancer. And that was the big thing. He had discovered that, you know, there's a particle, I think he called it like the BX particle or something like that, that you find in every cancer cell. And if you could, and he found the frequency that killed this particular particle. And what ended up happening is the AMA, once again, got wind of it, sued him to try to get, you know, that proprietary information, lost. But because they weren't able to gain that, they completely destroyed him professionally, demonized him. A lot of his work was destroyed physically, and this man died broke. He died broke.
Wow, how sad.
And when you think about how many millions of people would not have had to suffer and die from cancer, you can't help but to look at the AMA like a criminal organization.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It calls into question, right? It definitely calls into question. Now, you said microscopes today only look at dead material, but don't we see
Not
microscopes? No.
Yeah,
Yeah. We see, you know, organisms, one cell things moving around on the.
Yeah. Like electron microscopy, like you're able to see like a lot of things. But for the most part, the microscopes were only able to show like dead specimens, tissue specimens, things like that.
I just want to clarify that. Now we as a society in Western medicine got taught this germ theory, right? Germ theory.
Yes.
So you know, I've had many people get with me and talk to me about, you can see a bacteria, it exists in the dirt and the soil.
Right.
But it's interesting. Through the whole COVID, nobody shows a picture of the virus. They show you some digital picture, some round tube with spikes sticking out of it and some suction cups. And everybody has a nice little video, a nice little digital rendition. But I'm like, okay, where is it? Like, where is that? Like, if that's an actual thing, like, where's the live photo? What do you say about that?
Yeah, I think this whole COVID experience was, and that's another major reason why I got out of working in the hospital, because I didn't like what they were doing to patients. They were forcing the vaccine on patients on discharge, and they were forcing the employees to get it, and all these
Yeah.
mandates and things like that. And I wasn't a fan, especially considering that, like for me, I had COVID, and then I was being forced to get vaccinated. And I told them, well, what happened to, the education we all received in med school that said natural immunity was superior to vaccinations? Like, what
Yeah.
happened to this? When they're sending out emails to everyone, and you can see everyone else is on the email, I said, what happened to HIPAA? It's like we just completely threw the
Yep.
medicine and the legal aspect out in order to support mandating this vaccination. And so I was completely like frustrated and disappointed in the medical community with how they handled COVID. And with regard to like its origins and the picture of it and its treatments, this could also have very well just been treated by sound and light therapy. When you think
Yeah.
about it, it's a
Yeah.
virus. It's susceptible to the same things that these pathogens that Dr. Rife was helping to resolve. And so I think, and this is why I love this evolution of quantum medicine, because quantum medicine looks at these things as the defining diagnostic and therapeutic modality, looking at frequencies,
Yeah.
and targeting different dysfunctional organ systems by way of introducing therapeutic frequencies, right? Because if you can kill something using a frequency, you can heal something using frequencies. And we
Absolutely.
know this. And we know this. We know
Absolutely.
this. We have
Absolutely.
on
And,
this.
and that's why, whether we talk COVID or we talk cancer or we talk these diseases, these conditions, these moments in our human history, I think are moments for us to stop and question. I think they're moments for us to self-reflect and examine. Are we doing the absolute best by one another? Are we actually optimizing the tools that we have to us? So talk a little bit more about this quantum medicine, because I think this has got real future here for those people who are really looking for the answers, right? Really handling the origins of things, not just the symptoms. How would you explain that? Because I love this slide that you have here, like, the newer diagnostic treatment paradigm, and then you get into the actual quantum mechanics of it.
Yeah. So quantum medicine essentially is looking at our bodies from an energy perspective. That everything
Right.
is built on energy. That even what we consider to be matter is not really solid particle matter. It's just a hyperdensity of concentrated energy that's just moving really quickly, right?
Yeah.
And at the core of everything is a frequency, because since everything vibrates at a particular frequency.
Yeah.
So it introduces the idea that we can develop diagnostic and therapeutic technologies that are frequency based. That's the long and short of it. Where else it really helps is to understand the origin of disease, because before you have any sort of biomarker or structural change, you
Mhm.
have some sort of cellular desynchrony, we would say, because every cell vibrates at a specific frequency, which allows it to function at its optimal level, right? When that frequency is altered for whatever reason, whether its extracellular matrix is dehydrated, or is slightly acidotic or alkalemic, now you're disrupting how that cell vibrates, and therefore you're disrupting how it functions. And so that slide that you're referring to, the old model was that there was some insult, like an infection, and then you had a
Mhm.
biomarker change or structural change. And then you had symptoms. And most people only go to the doctor once they have symptoms, and that's where we introduce our treatments, right? So we're not really treating the problem; we're just managing the symptom, right?
Right.
So what quantum medicine is trying to get to is addressing the root cause of the problem. We know that there's some intrinsic dyssynchrony in cellular function, and therefore let's start to monitor those earlier stages before you even get to these biochemical and structural changes, right?
Right.
And what we know now is that virtually all disease, especially chronic disease, so like obesity, hypertension, diabetes, liver disease, dementia, all these is the result of chronic inflammation, right? But even chronic inflammation has its precursor. And I gave the three, what I consider to be the precursors of chronic inflammation. You have chronic stress, you have poor nutrition, and you have poor flow. And that's, it's the flow part that I think PT really helps to hone in, because a lot of what you do with the manual manipulation is to increase blood flow, increase lymphatic flow. And then there's the other element, increasing the flow of your chi and your ka. We need that because Western medicine doesn't even recognize our spiritual nature. Then our greatest disease is of the spirit. It's completely neglected. And so I love what PT does, because it really helps to focus in on optimizing this flow process. Because again, one of the things that I discussed in the presentation was how even the flow of our blood produces an electromagnetic field, right? Our blood is slightly negatively charged. So a negative charge in motion, by definition, is electricity, right? And electricity and magnetism have an intrinsic relationship in that they run parallel to each other. And so if my blood is running north to south, then the magnetic field is wrapped around our bodies perpendicularly. So if we're reducing blood flow, we're reducing the electromagnetic capacity of our bodies, which helps to synchronize our cellular processes. And when our cells don't speak to each other, that's when disease occurs.
Right. And that's why, and it's so funny. And we've been talking about this in a back your way into it way in physical therapy about if you don't move it, you lose it, right? You lose cognitive ability, you lose functional ability. And this chronic disease, for us, I think there's been a lot of conversation on this topic of inflammation, and it's so important. But when I was sitting in the seminar, you gave an example that really resonated with me, where you said the way we think of the pituitary gland doing its thing and sending a hormone down to a receptor, and then it miraculously finds the channel and then it releases another hormone. Or I may not be explaining that properly, but I think if I duplicated it right, you were saying that it resonates a frequency that to trigger that connection. It's not this long journeyed highway thing, because it wouldn't happen in the time that the body needs the way it functions, right? Could you explain that a little bit? Because I think people really love the science, because we're going to get into a little bit more on the treatment paradigm, but the science really does dictate this.
For sure. Yeah. So right now, the current model of thinking of how different biochemicals interact in our bodies, hormones, is by a lock and key model, right?
Right. That's
so
it.
You have like, say for example, you gave the example of the pituitary gland. Your pituitary releases a hormone, and one of its downstream targets is the adrenal gland, right? So it has to travel through your blood, and then it has to diffuse through your organ system, your muscles, your fascia, and all that takes time. And then it just sort of serendipitously like bumps into the receptor, which recognizes it in the perfect shape, alignment, and then it activates that cellular signaling. That seems far too inefficient for our body. Our bodies are the most efficient machine that we know in the universe, and for us to have these immediate responses, that locking key model cannot be the answer. And so what makes more sense is when you consider like your cell phones, right? Like, how do cell phones completely revolutionize communications? Why? Because you can dial someone's number, their specific frequency, and it rings only their phone. I think that's the exact same thing that happens within our bodies. I think when your body, when you consume something, for example, like we know, I'm big on, I make a lung detox. So now I'm using mullein, for example. We know mullein is very good for respiratory disease and improving pulmonary function, right? I don't think it's, breaking down the mullein into its individual compounds and those compounds binding to receptors that's doing the job. I think what happens is when your body breaks that mullein down into its individual components, each one of those molecules vibrates, sends off a frequency, and that frequency activates its corresponding receptor, the same way our cell phones. That to me makes better sense because that happens instant. Look what happens when you call someone's phone and they could be on the other side of the world, but it rains
Yeah.
instantly, right? Because that
Yeah.
pathway, that electromagnetic, that frequency pathway happens almost instantaneously. That's the
Yeah.
only way I can see our brain, our bodies being able to respond as quickly and as efficiently as it does. That lock and key model is antiquated and it just doesn't make sense.
And what I love about this conversation is that, and this is my message to all of you listening, is that if we continue to hang on to our prior fixed ideas, then we're escaping the responsibility of inspection. And without inspection, there's no advancement. And without advancement, we don't evolve and we don't really get to the answers of what's really going on. I'm asking all of you guys to abandon some of your historical fixed ideas for the sake of assuming that maybe there's something new under the sun here that really warrants your need for inspection. And Dr. Hinson, I just appreciate you bringing this to our forefront for a conversation, because I think there's a lot of us in physical therapy have been treating patients and we're like, this person does really well, and I gave the same kind of care to this person who didn't do really well. There's more going on here. There's more happening here. And we really need to stop dealing with the symptoms and really get to the core issues. In the treatment paradigm, you go on with quantum and medicine and the electromagnetic